Forget to do that. Okay. Chat. All right, welcome everyone to our first ReWIlding Academy. So hopefully you understand the concept of it. You might have gotten a few emails from me. I apologize if there was a lot of them when I set up all the schedules and calls and everything. But essentially, I'm hoping to make it all streamlined and all live on practice better. So every month we're going to be focusing on a foundational health module. This month, or normally there'll be kind of more, I guess, like physical body based, like gut health, detox, foundational health stuff. But we're also going to talk about the aspects of health that are beyond the physical. So the emotional body, the nervous system, the mental health body. And for this one, specifically the empathic nervous system. So I think that, I know that all of you are probably empaths in some sorts. You all identify, you all are very deep feelers, you're intuitive. And so this is an aspect of health that I do think is foundational. It's one that we don't really talk about. It's not really one that we have learned about. But because it is actually a foundational aspect of our being, I do consider it a foundational health topic. So that's why we're going to talk about it today. So feel free to engage if you want to, if you have questions or anything. There is the little hand up thing in Zoom, or just type it in the chat. I'm going to try and watch the chat. So if anything comes up, please engage there. Otherwise, if you want to have your camera on or off, that's totally fine. I get that it is Tuesday and you might be working and listening, so I appreciate you being here and showing up. And yeah, so if anything comes up, please share. So I'm going to go through today some of the course material. So hopefully you all found the online portion of the course with all the empath stuff. If you didn't, just let me know and I'll get that link to you later. But we're going to go through some of that. I'm going to apply some more knowledge, and I'm going to talk about some of the more interconnected things and ways of thinking that we can kind of bring this into reality. So when I talk about empaths and the highly sensitive nervous system, first of all, just as a caveat, I want us all to understand that, yes, while it's important to know that we are empaths and we're understanding our nervous systems, at the end of the day, it is kind of just another label to put on things, right? We're all, at the end of the day, we're all unique. We all have different ways of functioning and interpreting information. But empathy and empaths is similar to how we have categorized even people like autistic or schizophrenic. It's like a label for a way of being and understanding. So we're going to just talk about some of the nuances and what that means, and hopefully help ourselves exist in this world. Okay, does anyone have any questions or anything so far? Cool. So I remember one time I've always been like a sensitive person. I'm sure you all have as well. There's one time that I was working in a coffee shop. Maybe you've heard this story before, but and it was before I went down for my shift. I lived upstairs in the apartment building, and the coffee shop was literally on the ground floor. It was a very trendy little area. I loved it. But I was about to go down for my shift, and I had this thought in my mind, like, you have to go put on this bracelet. And it was this bracelet that had belonged to my like estranged grandmother, who was a very much like spiritual lady, but I never really knew her or talked to her at all. She had passed away recently, and she had left me some of her like crystal jewelry, and I had just put it away because I just put it away. But I had this very distinct thought in my head, was like, go get this bracelet. So I spent 10 minutes looking for it, put it on. It was a black onyx. Put it on, went to my coffee shop shift, was doing my thing. And then in the middle of my shift, I was in the back doing dishes or something like that. And there's this big biker guy just standing, like ordering a coffee, I guess, at the till. And he looks at me and we make eye contact. And I was like, oh, that's weird. But I kept on doing my thing. Came out like 3 minutes later and this guy's still there. And he literally looks like a big, large, bearded biker man. And he says to me, why are you wearing that bracelet today? Or like, what made you put on that bracelet today? The black one. And I was like, that is very interesting. Like, what's going on here? And he he proceeded to tell me, he was like, oh, your dad's grandmother or your dad's sister is standing beside you right now and wants me to tell you that you're there's like, he says, wants me to tell you that you're an empath, you're an intuitive, you're meant to be a conduit for source as an empathic person. This is what he was saying. But he said, you have holes in you. And so everything that's coming down and being channeled is just like coming out. And I was like, literally, I'm not making this up. This guy, just this big man, just comes to the coffee shop and says this to me out of nowhere. Like, doesn't know that this actually does make perfect sense to me. And I was like, okay. And then he told me a bunch of other very interesting things. But before he left, he said, make sure you fill those holes. Make sure you understand how to control your own energy, because once you can channel that energy, that's what you're meant to do. And so it was obviously a really weird experience. So like, obviously, like, yeah, I don't know, you know, but it was weird, but also not weird if you're open to that kind of thing. But like, what I still remember to this day was like, you were a conduit for source, but you have holes in you. And that, it rang so true to me. And it was such a good visual, because it was like, okay, I can't have things come, I'm absorbing things that aren't mine. I'm also expelling things that aren't mine. And like, how can I be a grounded conduit source if my energy is just kind of all over the place? And so this is kind of how I think of a lot of modern empathic people, or people who are wired this way, whether you want to call it empathy, or we're going to talk a little bit about human design and how we can look at it in that frame later too. But whatever you want to call it, even, you know, everybody has this ability too, is to just understand energy. But we often are, especially as empaths, we're either expelling it or we're intaking what's not ours. We're kind of like a semi-permeable cell membrane. And maybe you have heard, when it comes to empaths, our infamous ability to lack boundaries, which is something we're also going to talk about as well. But this is kind of where that comes from, right? We can't control what's incoming, what's external, going out. And so this is kind of why we have a lot of these issues. So we're going to talk about that. So remembering that up to 20 people, 20% of people are wired with an empathic nervous system or a highly sensitive nervous system. I'm going to talk about what that means. But also 80% of people aren't, and we're still a minority. So we're not living in a world designed for people who are more sensitive or empathic, simply because we're not designed for it. And so we overwhelm our nervous systems quite easily. And this is why I think it is a foundational piece of health, is because when we understand how to regulate that and kind of how to exist and navigate the world that we have to live in, it can help calm us, it can help us stay grounded, it can help us actually channel all of this stuff that I think all of us know is existing, whether we believe it or not, and kind of make sense of a world that we might not be able to see with our senses. I'm going to talk a little bit about that too. So I'm not going to be completely woo-woo. I'm going to blend it into some science stuff later, but I'll live on the fringe like I like to. Okay, so what is an empath and versus empathy versus empathetic versus a highly sensitive person? Highly sensitive people, again, these are kind of labels that we've created, that I've created. So even when I'm talking about this group of subset of people, they're blurred. It's not like you're not highly sensitive or this person's not empathic. We all have these innate abilities in us. So, you know, we're just somewhat all wired differently. So the highly sensitive umbrella is kind of up here. It encapsulates empaths It encapsulates people who might have like eczema or allergies, who are sensitive to the environment. And it's just like people who are more sensitive, really. Empaths are a subset of this highly sensitive nervous system. So empaths more, we're talking here about the ability to interrelate with their world, to feel energies, to be on a more emotional level. So it's someone who is literally wired to integrate with the world. So it's not a diagnosis in the DSM or anything like that, but empathetic or empathic people tend to be more anxious, more high strung, more prone to overwhelm, more prone to chronic disease, allergy, eczema, again, all of these things. So we're going to talk about a little bit about why that happens. But again, a lot of us, we grow up in a world that wasn't designed for highly sensitive empaths. And so we don't really learn what this means. We don't know that it exists. We kind of just are told that we're sensitive. So if any of you have told that if I imagine if that you were sensitive when you were young or that you were dramatic, I get that one a lot. One that I often now lovingly will sometimes tell myself, because let's be honest. But you might have been told that you're like too much. This is one that is interesting because it's tied to a lot of women, and we all as a whole have kind of collectively adopted this, and we're working to rewire that, which I love. But it is something that exists. So I was told that dramatic, too much, sensitive. If you are sensitive to large crowds, strong emotions, bright lights, things like that, if you can go into a room and someone's energy, feel the tone. A good example of like an empathic reaction that pretty much anyone can tap into is just going into like a concert or a sports arena and just tapping into that energy of people around you. But imagine as an empath, as you might, going into a small room and feeling that all the time. It can be really hard to regulate. Again, if you're picturing yourself as intaking all that energy, but having holes in you and having it kind of come in and out. So again, we're going to talk about the different kinds of empathy, but these are just some signs that you might feel or you might have a highly sensitive nervous system. Maybe you have trouble winding down. Maybe you have trouble like disconnecting yourself from work or from a strong emotional situation. A lot of us, we tend to go into positions of healing, of integrating, of, you know, family, of stuff that can hold a lot of pain. But we, again, with our boundaries, sometimes have trouble turning this off, and we take a lot of it in. And our bodies and our nervous systems will hold that, whether our conscious minds will or won't, because we will protect ourselves. And we talk about the neuroscience of this, but our body does keep the score. That's a book, a great one, talking about how our nervous systems and our bodies hold on to this stuff. So even though our energy, we might not feel stressed, our body will hold on to this stuff. So this is a kind of a sign of how empaths can take on this energy and it translates into the physical body. Empaths are also in general just very deep thinkers. We think collectively more on a we level. And so as our world transitions through a time of sort of chaos and there's a lot of pain and there's just a lot of fear, we tap into that collectively as a whole. So even if we're not, you know, in a room talking to someone one-on-one, like we can tap into their energy, their mood, but we also just tap into the general collective as a whole. There's something called the collective unconscious, if you believe that. But we have the ability to understand that. So even when we're going through our day, I used to feel very rigid in trying to understand why I felt off that day. Like, did I eat too much sugar? Did I go to bed too late? Is my period coming? And yes, it's important to pay attention to these triggers, but now a lot of the time I can like deciphering when stuff is coming in that's not necessarily mine and kind of letting it move through. like, yes, I feel really anxious. This past week, I just felt very anxious and off. And before I would kind of move into a place where I'm like, what is it? What is it? What is it? Got my doctor hat on. And for empaths and understanding a highly sensitive nervous system, it is about doing that, but it's also kind of letting it move through and recognizing when it's not yours and when it's coming from other places, whether that be a family member, a friend, the collective in general. And again, kind of transmuting it and letting it go. So that is actually one of our jobs and why we're wired this way, which I'm going to talk about now, is to, again, interpret this and transmute it in our nervous systems to calm it down. So let's see how I want to talk about this now. So let's talk quickly about okay, so hopefully that makes sense, that the empathic nervous system is sensitive, it's here to interrelate it is here to kind of be a conduit and hold things in, but we need to work on boundaries. It can move into our physical body often, we can feel energy often, and we weren't really taught how to channel this into a language or system of being or knowing. So we kind of go through life as empathic women being told we're dramatic, sensitive, too much, which is not true. It's not good. It's actually a power, and we're here to harness that. So, or in the course, I talk about the different kinds of empaths. So some of those being like a physical empath, emotional. Well, I'll go through them quickly. Now, you might notice as you're an empathic person and you're kind of resonating with some of these, you might resonate with all of them, with some of them, with one of them more. But this is what I'm saying when I mean we're all very different. And while we're all kind of under the umbrella of highly sensitive, we're all under the umbrella of empaths, we're still going to have different superpowers, different codes, different imprints, and different purposes, which is why it's so fun and why it's so interesting. So see what resonates for you, see what doesn't, and then kind of maybe dive into that scale a little bit more and pay attention. So physical empaths are one of the first types. They're more the type of person that can really tune into the physical body. So if you're with someone and if they have a stomach ache and they're really anxious, you might actually feel that stomach ache. You might actually feel that headache. You might actually start to feel that tension in your body. This is what a physical empath is, or they really tune into the physical energy. Emotional empaths, this is usually the most common, and I think all empaths really have this as a kind of a hallmark, but the ability to feel another person's emotion. So watching a sad movie, being with someone who just had a breakup, or even being with a friend who's super excited, they just got a new job or whatever, they got engaged, they're happy, really able to tune into that emotion and be present and share with it. An emotional empath. Intuitive empath. So again, this is a little bit harder to explain. It's kind of just like the knowing, the gut feeling, the tuning into the intuition. Then there's plant, earth, and animal empaths. Again, just feeling more in tune with those things. The dream empaths and the Heyoka empaths. So these are kind of, again, really more interesting ones. And these are labels that I'm using right now are kind of more from the psychology, Western, New Age spirituality sense. That's where I'm using these. But even things like you could look at it from human design, from indigenous cultures, like they would have dream empaths, what I'm calling them, but that's kind of just, they would have that role in their own culture and they live that. So when we call it empath, like a special kind of nervous system, other cultures recognize that as just a way of being, as just another superpower, as just that person's skill. Anyway, so the dream empaths and the Heyoka empaths, more of like an elusive kind of term, which is why I brought that up. It's something that is not as well defined in our Western world, kind of tuning in more to like the dream realm, obviously, but whatever that is, I'm going to talk about that here in a second. And the Heyoka mirror empath, so someone who is really tapping into all of those things and all of those energies and mimicking it back, whether they're not often not conscious of it. In human design, they may be more of like a reflector energy, but just subconsciously picking these things up. And this kind of person can often be really triggering for people as they mirror back things that other people are exemplifying, which a lot of the time are insecurities. And they pick up on it. And so it's not like this person is trying to trigger other people intentionally. It's just what happens. And it's not a bad thing to move through life being this way, but it can be somewhat lonely and irritating and frustrating at times. Okay, so what I was saying with, so there's a different type of empaths, there's a different ways, okay, the different, and our system is, we have different empaths, the different states that we desire. We actually different states of frequency band, different states of consciousness. So in neuroscience now of understanding the alpha, the beta, the theta, delta frequencies relate for a day. So for sleeping, we're in delta. If we're working, sensitive nervous system, that ability to easily get alpha wave state. Okay, audio is correctly. Which means my headphones are about to die. Can you hear me now? Okay. So when we are, what was I saying? So that highly sensitive nervous system potentially has an ability and is wired to pick up on different frequencies and move into different states of consciousness. So again, we've only gone as far to define these 4 frequency bands of consciousness, but because we're wired to deeply integrate things, we can access these differently. And these are being shown now as we just start to study the functional MRI scans and see what these, like the subset of these nervous systems are doing. But HeartMath Institute, the Institute of Noetic Sciences, these are groups that are starting to study these different kinds of nervous systems and what they can do and what they're actually here to do. So yeah, when we're studying that, some of the ways that the empathic nervous system is wired differently is that we have more gray matter in our brains. So it is wired differently, specifically between the left and the right hemisphere of the brain. And so what this is interesting is connecting different the right and the left brain. So creating the creative and the logic. What empaths are really here to do, again, is because we're such deep feelers and integrators, is to take all this energy in and integrate it in a way that humans haven't seen yet, and things that are new, in ways to create ways that are more efficient. So when you think of like the campfire as being the original internet, this is sort of where the highly sensitive people hung out and got their ideas, listening to the chatter, intaking the information, feeling the different energies. Their nervous systems, which were wired differently with the more gray matter, with the ability to access those different states of consciousness, those different frequency bands, literally firing differently, intake this information and like consider it differently. So their nervous systems are processing it differently. And so when we live in a world where we're constantly stimulated with new information and new ways of being and this and that, we're constantly still integrating all of these things, and we're trying to connect, and we're trying to figure it out, and we're trying to do all of these things innately. This is how we're wired, and this is how it becomes overwhelming. Is because we're literally trying to create a web of systems in a world that is so complex in a web of systems already. Also, we are more we're more sensitive to dopamine in general. And this is, again, because we integrate and we see things differently. So we're wired to be more prone to dopamine hits. Our world obviously is like, dopamine is the key. Like, more likes, more whatever, more flashing lights, dopamine, dopamine, dopamine. So when we're already wired to be more sensitive, this just kind of jacks up our nervous system. It jacks up everything trying to connect. And so we end up even more overwhelmed. In the Eastern system, or in the New Age energetic, I don't know what you want to call it, alternative systems, there's something called the Nadial system. And so this is kind of like the energetic counterpart of the nervous system, how I see it. It's more of the antenna of how we actually get this information. So this doesn't really exist as much in the Western system, but the Nadial system, it's, again, I think of it as the antenna that attracts all of this outside information and this energy and the stuff that the empaths and the highly sensitive are quite sensitive to. And then the nervous system in our physical body is what takes this information and translates it into a way of being and understanding. And so when we are living in a world constantly trying to interpret and think and figure out, and are overloaded with dopamine and information and sensory stuff, when our nervous system is overwhelmed, how this translates into the physical body is our nervous system that is really triggered and overwhelmed. And so you probably have heard me often talk to all of you, I think every single one of you, about the vagus nerve and the stress response, and how when we are triggered, we move into what's called the sympathetic nervous system response. And then that is like the fight or flight, and that continues on our body until our vagus nerve gets pulled, the emergency brake gets pulled, and we end up in a freeze response. So this is happening because our subconscious brain has interpreted all this information and overstimulation. And then we also have our regular lives, our conscious stuff, the things we think about going on top of this layer of processing and overthinking, that we end up in a state of freeze. And then this is kind of where we are now in terms of the health. So this is where the Western system comes in. This is kind of where the human part we start understanding, like, oh shit, there's a problem. This person is stressed. This person is whatever, overwhelmed. And we can start dealing with the physical stuff, but really we're going back all the way up the ladder, understanding that we're overwhelmed because our nervous system is wired this way, and we weren't told how to deal with all this incoming information. And the world is overstimulating, and I don't know what to do with it, or how to deal with it, or where to put it. And my brain is accessing different frequencies. Like, what is happening? And so now we're going to kind of talk about the physical, how we can actually take all of this stuff and make it into something actionable and help you understand how to move your nervous system into a calm state, or into a state that you can harness the superpowers that live within you. Excuse me. Okay, so hopefully this is all making sense. I know I'm kind of rambling a bit. I'm trying to come full circle to a place where it's all making sense. So let me see here. So some of the physical stuff that might come up for empaths and people with highly sensitive nervous systems is often a result of the suppression or of the overstimulation that comes. So there are kind of two again, labels I'll put on the way that our body keeps a score when it comes to overstimulation and taking in this information. More of a suppressive action or more of a reactive reaction. So a suppressive reaction is, having all of this stuff coming in, feeling overwhelmed and wanting to shut it down. So this is a natural way of being, and a lot of empaths and myself have done this. So this can look like distraction, work, addiction,
substances, alcohol, sleep, things like that, anything that suppresses it. And when we do this, our body, it can go deeper and deeper and deeper into the body and manifest as things like chronic disease, gut issues, fatigue, low libido, detachment, topical steroid withdrawal, right? That's literally kind of a physical example of suppressing, and then having it move into the next reactive eruption. So another category or way that this can manifest, this anxiety overwhelm of the empathic nervous system can manifest, is in a reactive way. So autoimmune, allergies, eczema, again, gut stuff, again, anxiety and panic disorder. So taking in all of this stuff and not letting it flow through, and it will get stuck in the body, and how it will manifest more suppressive or more reactive, it doesn't stay there. It does translate to our physical body. Okay, so I want to also talk about human design really quickly here. I don't know how many of you dabble in human design. I'll quickly explain what it is. It's a kind of a mixture between astrology and Myers-Briggs personality typing, and excuse me, and like gene keys, genetics. It's really interesting. It's like a helping way of understand your genetic blueprint and why you do why you do things the way you do, how you can understand the way that you exist in the world better. So in human design, so I'm using the term empath here. Do any of you know your human design type? Yeah, Marianne, nice. Cool. Well, if you do, drop it in the chat. If you don't, it would be interesting to look it up, because human design, so empaths here, I'm talking about being more open, having an open emotional center, being more tuned into energies and frequencies. In the system of human design and understanding, I find when I look at my clients and my patients, they'll be what's called they'll have an emotional authority, or they'll be nice manifestor generator, cool. So even looking at your authority is what I find here helpful. An emotional authority, or non-emotional authority, meaning you're, again, tying in a different system, the Ayurvedic system. The solar plexus chakra is closed, and this is where I kind of get a little bit woo-woo, but that's okay. The solar plexus chakra is closed or open, and this translates to human design authority type, meaning are you more sensitive to emotions, or are you generating your own? If you have a closed emotional center of your authority type, it likely means that you generate your own emotions. So it's really important for you to pay attention to these. They're your own a lot of the time. If you have an open emotional authority center, you don't generate your own emotions. And so you're kind of tuning into other people's around you. So again, it's not like using hard and fast rules, but it's just saying a different understanding perspective, kind of saying the same thing. Open solar plexus, define sacral. Yeah, so open solar plexus, define sacral, meaning like you can generate energy. Open solar plexus, meaning that you're an open emotional, so you don't likely generate your own emotions. You tap into other people's. Empath. So interesting way, again, same, but different. Okay. So I am going to I think I'm going to leave it there today in terms of talking about the empathic nervous system and what it means, how it evolved. Next week, I want to talk more about the actual physical manifestations of how it can go wrong, not go wrong, but how it can manifest in the physical world, break down how we can kind of work into remedying some of those. And I also want to talk a little bit more about boundaries. Again, I mentioned those, the elusive boundaries that we are not great at. and talk about how to actually set them, how to visualize them. Again, I am huge into visualization. I think this is a part of our nervous system and we just don't use, but it's so powerful, especially when it comes to boundaries and empaths. So I'm going to teach you one from a system called total body modification that I learned super helpful and that I use. And yeah, if you have any questions or any specific issues you want to go through next week, just send me an email and let me know. If you have any questions now, I would love to hear them. I'm going to just hang out here for a sec, whether you want to pop on and just chat or pop it in the text box to me or to everyone. Hopefully you all learned a thing or two from the combination of us chatting today and the course. Otherwise, I will post this recording. I know I talked a lot about a lot of different things, so I'll post it so you can go through it again and hear. And you can hop off if you're done. Have a great day.